In the wake of Glaza's scream, Lady Aura appeared out of the Dryad's tree. You are? Her eyes widened in shock. She stopped herself just before she collided with a nearby wall. Lord Mayor appeared behind her. Oh! Lord Mayor crashed into his sister, and together they tumbled into a heap. Ow! He groaned. Why did you stop like that, big sis? There's a wall here. Lady Aura said, did you get the wrong tree? I don't think that's possible. Ludmilla came forward. Despite her understanding that the two young dark elves were vastly more powerful than she, concern still rose within her over their safety. My apologies, Lady Aura, Lord Mayor, we had to move the tree indoors with us. Are you all right? At her question, the two royal courtiers untangled themselves and rose to their feet. They brushed themselves off as the undead servitors bowed their heads. Willingham already had her forehead pressed to the polished granite floor. Ludmilla swept her skirts out into a curtsy. Welcome, Lady Aura. Lord Mayor. Hello, Lord Mayor turned his attention to Glaza. This is Glaza Gelgronvid, Ludmilla said, the dryad you were contacted about. Glaza, this is Lord Mayor Bellofiore, a druid. His elder sister here is Lady Aura Bellafiora, a ranger. Lady Aura and Lord Mayor stared at Glaza for a long while. She looks kinda different. The dryads at home look different from one another too, big sis. That's not what I meant. Glaza leaned back as the Lady Aura leaned forward to examine her. Lord Mayor looked over her shoulder, clutching his staff closely. Ah, I get it, he said. Their trees are different. The ones at home are all oak trees. Lady Aura's gaze went over to Glaza's potted tree. Come to think of it, these leaves look familiar. After several moments, a furrow appeared on the girl's brow. Mayor. What? Just to be sure, what kind of tree is this? Divine ash. Lady Aura's eyes grew wide at the revelation. She reached out and grabbed Lord Mayor by the shoulders, shaking him violently. Mayor. Why did you plant a divine ash here? Where did you even get them from? The seeds. They're cuttings from home. Lord Mayor dizzily replied, we didn't have any seeds. Lord Ines told us to look for ways to increase our strength, so I took a few and put them in pots. Anyway, I put them in different places to see where they would grow best. Since they're the only ones in the area, it makes them perfect for teleporting around. So that other potted tree in the Lizardman village is divine ash. Where else did you plant these cuttings? On the island in Randall's demi-human quarter. And? That's it. Silence fell over Ludmilla's makeshift hall. With a rustle of leaves, Glaza tentatively raised a hand towards Lord Mayor. Excuse me, you're a druid, right? Can you tell me what's going on? Is there something wrong with me? Not at all. Lord Mayor came forward excitedly, taking the dryad's hands in his. This is great. None of the other cuttings have a dryad. You might be the only one of your kind in the world. Glaza opened her mouth, then closed it again. She looked down at the floor shyly. Lady Aura cleared her throat. So, she said, what are we going to do with her? I wonder. The dryad looked up with a hopeful expression. You mentioned other dryads, she said. Maybe you can take me to join them? We can't just bring anyone with us, Lord Mayor said. Plus there must be a reason why none of the other cuttings have a dryad. You were born here, don't you want to stay? Maybe it's because her tree is in a pot, Lady Aura said. She was born as a portable dryad. But if she was born here, Lord Mayor looked over at his sister, that must mean it's a good place, right? Pinnison and the others said something like that, dryads don't just pop up in any old place. Glaza turned her head to look out the window towards the village square. It's all rock, she said. I need a place with good soil so I can transplant my tree. You don't want to stay in the pot? Lord Mayor asked. I think it's pretty neat, since you can move around with your tree, you can help out around here. Help out? We've just started building this city, so there will be plenty for you to do. Hold up, Lady Aura held out a hand. Before you two get swept up in your crazy city planning again, we need to talk. We do? Glaza frowned. Not you, Lady Aura said. You. Lady Aura's gaze met Ludmilla's. What would you like to discuss, my lady? A couple of things, actually, Lady Aura told her. In private. Ludmilla bid the gathered undead return to their tasks before leading Lady Aura up the stairs to her bedroom. Lady Aura grabbed Lord Mayor's elbow, dragging him along. After closing the door behind her, Ludmilla reached into her infinite haversack, retrieving the silence item she had recently purchased. She activated the magic item and set it on her desk. "Will that be sufficient, my lady?" Lady Aura cocked an ear, remaining silent for several moments. "I can't hear anything outside, so it should be good enough." "Then, I don't have much in the way of hospitality, but please make yourselves comfortable." Lord Mayor looked around for a few moments before walking over to sit down on her bed. Lady Aura walked over to stand by the window, crossing her arms in front of her. "I guess I should ask what's been driving me crazy first." Lady Aura looked her in the eye. "Did something happen to you?" "Many things have happened, my lady," Ludmilla replied. "What would you like to know?" "Your smell has gotten weaker. There are a few other weird things too. When you're standing still, you stand still. Most people shift around or try to relax or become more comfortable. Your breathing is too regular. You've become less human, or maybe you're pretending to be one. At first, I thought maybe Shaltir turned you, but I can still hear your heartbeat and your body is still warm." "You could sense all of that?" "A range's senses get stronger the higher level they are," Lady Aura said. "You should know that." "So, what happened?" Ludmilla walked over to her desk, reaching out to flip her chair around. She sat down and took a deep breath. His Majesty said that they could be trusted. "It wasn't Lady Shaltir," she said. "I died on the Azalizia expedition, and then I got up again. I didn't even notice I was undead until Lady Shaltir pointed it out to me." Lady Aura and Lord Mayor exchanged looks. Lord Mayor shifted slightly on her mattress. "What kind of undead are you?" he asked. "His Majesty concluded that I'm a revenant," Ludmilla answered. "A type of undead being that comes back for some specific purpose." "Do you know what that purpose is?" "Not precisely," Ludmilla replied. "As far as I understand, it should be some sort of duty." Lady Aura snorted. "That sounds just like you." Lady Shaltir said the same thing. Ludmilla smiled slightly. "I suppose it just goes to show how alike you are." The dark elf girl looked out the window, making a face. "We need to know if there's any way you can bring harm to Lord Ainz's country," Lord Mayor said. I don't think you do anything on purpose, but maybe you have an aura or a passive ability or something." "I understand, my lord," Ludmilla nodded. Over the next half hour, she shared what she knew about revenants and their traits. Lady Aura and Lord Mayor listened intently, occasionally stopping her to ask a question about one thing or the other. "Does that mean Glaz's awakening is due to your maintenance?" Lord Mayor asked. "I cannot say for certain, my lord," Ludmilla answered, "but I think it factors into things somehow. Perhaps it is a bit counterintuitive, but because I can sense negative energy, it means that I know where it isn't, if that makes any sense. Life and death have a balance, and it is only when there is an imbalance do you experience the more pronounced signs of either. Both are usually always there. I suppose that I might have been throwing things off balance by being a bit too keen about absorbing negative energy. MMH, but what about you?" Ludmilla frowned as the discussion went from the Dryad to her. "What about me, my lord?" "Well, if you're absorbing negative energy, and that causes life to flourish, doesn't that ultimately lead to more death?" "Natural or peaceful deaths don't seem to result in much negative energy, my lord. The imprint left behind by violent, unnatural deaths or those accompanied by inordinate amounts of negative emotions is far more significant." "But it's still something," Lord Mayor said. "Maybe it's natural and not enough to tip the balance of things, but all those little amounts add up over time, right? Maybe 1,000 natural deaths are equal to a murder, or something like that?" She hadn't expected to suddenly be trying to figure out measures for different types of deaths. Ludmilla supposed that she would be eminently qualified to do so, but it wasn't as if she ran around her domain with a teaspoon to measure how much negative energy a dead squirrel was worth. Below a certain threshold, she couldn't sense specific amounts of negative energy at all, just its vague existence. It was akin to dropping a grain of sugar into the Katza River and trying to discern how much sweeter the water had become. "I'm not sure if it's something I can measure, my lord," Ludmilla said, "but I will keep this in mind if something does result in a tangible amount of negative energy. Beyond that, however, I don't even know what happens to the negative energy that I absorb. You mean it's not something like Shiltier's blood pool? Lady Aura frowned. Or maybe you could use what you've stored up, like running up to a city one day and going negative energy bomb, and blasting it off of the map. Lady Aura threw up her arms in a bam motion. Perhaps that was another thing she shared with Lady Shiltier. At least Lord Mayor wouldn't treat mass destruction in such a flippant way. I don't think so, my lady. Che, boring. Do you think that's possible? Don't ask me, Lady Aura said. I'm not the negative energy sponge. Why not try summoning some negative energy? Ludmilla held out her hand out, focusing her being to summon a sphere of negative energy. Lady Aura and Lord Mayor leaned forward. Is there something there? Lord Mayor asked. No, Ludmilla replied. There's nothing there. Maybe something will come out if we squeeze you. I would rather not have anything squeezed out of me, my lady. Well, Lady Aura said, work on it, I guess. The people around here come up with all sorts of crazy things, so maybe you can too. Anyway, it looks like you're keeping this a secret. I'd like to keep this a secret for now. Yes, Ludmilla nodded. I don't want to do anything to destabilize the realm. Things are starting to go back to normal again in the duchy, and the last thing we need is some panic about humans being turned into undead. Lady Aura and Lord Mayor nodded quietly. The Dark Elf Ranger placed a hand on her hip, putting on a thoughtful expression. How many people know about this? She asked. His Majesty, Lady Shiltier, Countess Corlin, Dame Verilyn and my maids. Miss Nobbe as well. Nobbe? Lady Aura frowned. Does that mean Moman knows as well? It's possible, Ludmilla admitted. Miss Nobbe was very kind and supportive when I consulted her on the matter, so I don't think she would mention it to anyone else. Lady Aura's face screwed up in confusion. Nobbe was, huh? Doesn't she usually refer to everyone around her as vermin? She still calls me Woodlouse, Ludmilla smirked. I think we get along well, so it feels more like her nickname. Come to think of it, a few of the royal maids call me the same thing. Can you think of anyone else that might know? Ludmilla fell silent for several moments, reviewing recent events. Captain Iska and Ruins Awake know about it. We met in the Katsa Plains and I didn't have my ring of non-detection equipped. That means the vampire brides that accompanied us know. As does the Death Warrior Captain, the Death Knights and the Death Priests. There were a pair of shadow demons working with me, and everyone we came across during that entire trip. That's an awful lot of people, Lady Aura said. Who else? Lord Cocytus, his officers and the rest of the Royal Army's forces stationed there. It was an awful lot of people. Did His Majesty's undead servitors gossip amongst themselves? If so, her secret wasn't a secret anymore. A furrow formed over her brow as she wondered what could have been done. I'll take care of it, Lady Aura said. You would do this for me, my lady? Yeah, no problem, I think. MMH. Lady Aura placed her hand on her head. You said that some vampire brides were there, Lord Mayor asked. Does that mean you went with Lord Ines? Yes, my lord, Ludmilla answered. What did Lord Ines say? His Majesty was very interested in many things, including my undead state. He had me lead a company of undead soldiers around while we explored the plains to help me gain levels as a captain-type commander. Partway through, His Majesty bestowed a new set of equipment upon me. The ring of non-detection that Lady Shiltier provided was left as a part of the set. That so? Lady Aura lowered her hand. It shouldn't be a problem at all, then. Thank you for looking out for me, my lady. Ludmilla lowered her head. Perhaps this is what having a big sister feels like. That makes me all itchy. By the way, that idiot didn't do anything weird on Lord Ines's trip, did she? Lady Shiltier was very happy to be there, but she also had to work very hard as His Majesty's sole escort. There was time to relax on the way back, but I don't think she acted much differently from the woman that I've come to know. So she didn't try to do anything with Lord Ines, right? My lady possesses great love and passion for His Majesty, Ludmilla said, but I do not think she is the type to do anything unless called upon. She only did her best to accompany him. Lady Aura closed her eyes and let out a sigh of relief. I told you nothing would happen, big sis. One of Lady Aura's eyes opened, glaring down at Lord Mayor. He shrank back further onto Ludmilla's bed. Why you weren't around to pull her off like the last time this happened, you know. Pull her off? Ludmilla frowned. Has something happened in the past? It wasn't Chiltia, it was Albedo. She got tossed into the frozen prison for a few days to cool off after that. You didn't hear us say anything, by the way. As far as Ludmilla had heard, Lady Albedo was some sort of powerful demon. Lady Chiltia had mentioned her as a rival for His Majesty's affections, but Ludmilla had always thought that it was something like jockeying for a position at the Sorcerer King's right hand. Demons and undead couldn't, could they? Wasn't there something else you wanted to talk about, Big Sis? Huh? Was there? Oh, yeah, that dryad, or more like her tree. Are you too sure you want to keep her here? That's divine ash, you know. I'm not familiar with that species of ash tree, my lady. Are they very different? Divine ash doesn't grow around here, Lady Aura told her, as far as we've seen. They grow really slow, but they get really big. That pot might last for a century or two, but you'll have to plant it somewhere eventually. A tree that took centuries to outgrow its pot? Ludmilla had never heard of the like. If it takes that long to grow, she asked, then why mention it right now? Because if you plan on keeping it here, you're gonna have to plan your city with this tree in mind. Just how tall will this divine ash become? Lady Aura looked over at Lord Mayor. I don't think it stops growing. It grows all year round, too. It will grow in winter? Big Sis is right that we'll have to plan around it growing in the city here, but I thought you would like it. Lord Mayor drew up his knees and pressed his fingers together shyly. You don't? He asked. I don't know enough to make an informed choice, Ludmilla said. The way you make it sound, it seems to be a monumental undertaking. What was it you mentioned about increasing strength? Lord Mayor brightened and shifted back forward. Divine ash is a great crafting material. If we can successfully grow it here, I'm sure Lord Dines will be pleased. That's not fair. At the mention that the Sorcerer King might be pleased with the results, she was already inclined to say yes. Won't Glazer take issue with being turned into crafting materials? We don't harvest the tree, there's a certain technique to it. Even though it's a really big tree, it's still just a tree and responds like one. The book I read talks about making nodes for suckers along the roots and the main branches after the tree grows large enough. Then you just harvest the suckers from the nodes when they grow large enough. The woodsmen around the duchy do it. I think it's called coppicing, or maybe pollarding. What he spoke of was common knowledge for rangers, druids, and those involved in forestry, but this was far beyond that. How tall are the shoots when you harvest them? She asked. About 2 meters. They take about a century to grow that big. A whole century for a shoot large enough to fashion into a spear or a bow. It sounded like the stuff of legends, where heroes underwent a great adventure to retrieve some mythical ingredient or material from a perilous locale. She supposed that if someone did try to steal something, they would indeed have several hundred legendary beings chasing after them for trespassing and theft. Maybe the origins of such stories were not so heroic. I don't think you mentioned how large this tree gets, my lord. I was thinking that we could plant the main body of the tree in a central location and lead the roots all over the city. It might take centuries if I use magic, but we'll get it done eventually. We can grow trees at regular points that are really shoots sprouting from the roots. Many plants could propagate themselves in the fashion that Lord Mayor described, but the scale of his proposal was vast. The island that had been raised for the city had an area of approximately 60 square kilometers. Green spaces were planned to be abundant in the city, Ludmilla said, but I had no idea that you had something like this in mind. Why didn't you tell me? I would have told you eventually, Lord Mayor said, but it felt a bit sad. You were a human, so you'd have only lived long enough to see it barely begin. Ludmilla smiled at Lord Mayor, resting her cheek on a forearm. Thank you for your consideration, my lord, she said, but it's not something I would have gotten sad over as a human. If anything, I would have been happy to see that something like that was left to my descendants. Well, instead of my descendants, I suppose you'll be putting up with me for the indeterminate future. So we can do it? I think it's a wonderful idea, my lord, Ludmilla said. Upon their return to the main floor, Ludmilla found Llewellynam and Glazagel Gronvid glaring across the potted tree at one another. The Death Knight was still holding onto the pot. Both the Dryad and the Elf had a hand on the edge of the pot, though it seemed that they had given up on trying to wrest it from the Death Knight's armored grip. At the sound of their approach, Waylynam lowered herself reverently before Lady Aura and Lord Mayor. In response, the two siblings seemed to be trying their best to ignore her. Ludmilla still had no idea why elves acted that way around the Dark Elf twins. Lady Aura and Lord Mayor treated it as an annoyance at best, and Waylynam barely spoke at all. Even Mary, the free-spirited and easy-going adventurer, turned deferential in their presence. This deferential behavior usually came in the form of a sort of care of the twins, treating them as if they were indescribably precious. On rare occasions, however, they reacted with wariness. "Glazer," Ludmilla said. "Have you given further thought to the idea of staying in Warden's Vale?"
No."
Glazer looked up at her blankly. Was I supposed to be doing that? She wasn't sure if it was just the way that dryads were, but Glazer seemed remarkably oblivious to anything but threats to her tree. Then again, she was probably less than 2 hours old. "I hadn't specifically asked you to." "No," Ludmilla said. "I have no right to detain you, but I would welcome a dryad such as yourself with open arms. The foundations for the city here have just recently been raised, which is why it appears as an expanse of barren stone. In the future, however, it will become a place with an abundance of verdant spaces. As Lord Mayor has mentioned, you are a very special dryad. Your presence here would be a great boon." "Special? I don't feel very special. Not in a good way, at least. I actually think there's something wrong with me. I was born in the autumn and my tree is tiny. It's in a pot. My leaves are all shiny, too. And I don't think trees are supposed to glow." Admittedly, trees were not supposed to glow. Nor did they have shiny golden red leaves all year long. With the advent of the Sorceress Kingdom, however, a tree that glowed slightly was far down on the list of realities to question. "It's because the tree you were born from is divine ash," Lord Mayor's voice came from her left. "They don't all have leaves like yours, but they're still the same species. Divine ash doesn't fall asleep in the winter, it grows in every season, so being born in the autumn isn't weird." "Really?" Glazer turned a suspicious gaze to her tree. Lord Mayor's eyes turned teary, and his lip quivered. "And look." He held up his staff. "Divine ash is valuable, too. My staff is made from divine ash." The dryad's head snapped around, eyes wide. Her head went up and down as she compared her wrist to Lord Mayor's staff. No." Glazer shook her head. "No. I don't want to." Annoying." Lady Aura suddenly shouted, "This is why dryads are, all they do is scream and complain. Kindling. Just turn her into kindling, that's all she's good for. Just give up, Mayor, we can use the other trees, ones without annoying dryads." Behind Glazer, the Death Knight set down the pot and drew its flambe. "Why it?" The dryad screeched, "I'll do it. Don't chop me up." Lady Aura crossed her arms and looked over at Ludmilla. "What do you think? Do they truly scream and complain that much, my lady?" "Aha," Lady Aura frowned. Pinnerson was even noisier than this one. Was. Glazer came over, falling to her hands and knees. She clutched Ludmilla's skirts with dewy tears in her eyes. You're supposed to be a warden, right? Are you going to let this happen? I'm a nature spirit, you know." "She really is noisy," Ludmilla murmured. "I'm sorry I wanted to go away," Glazer cried. "I'll do whatever you want, you can plant me wherever you want." Ludmilla placed a hand on Glazer's leafy head. "I suppose we can see how you do as my vassal," she said. "A vassal?" Glazer sniffed. "What's that?" "If I were to put simply, it is someone who has sworn their service to someone else in exchange for land, security, and certain rights. In your case, it would mean that you would be allowed to live here under my protection. In exchange, Lord Mayor, are dryads druids?" No, they're just dryads. Dryads have some spell-like abilities that are druid spells, but they aren't innate druids like nymphs. Let's see, they can use twine plant, speak with plants, tree shape, charm person, deep slumber, woodland stride, and suggestion. Since they're spell-like abilities, they're more like skills? They're really good for her current level, but the magic stays at the potency of a level 18 druid no matter how much stronger she gets. For someone who was just born an hour or two ago, her magic was quite powerful. Humans truly had an uphill struggle for survival in the world. Would it make sense for her to become a druid? Ludmilla asked.
Lord Mayor nodded.
It's really useful for plant-type heteromorphs to become druids. The spells that I've been using to improve crop yields are third-tier druidic magic, so they can use their own magic to feed and grow themselves. Even demi-humans like the ones that came to live up in the mountains around here use those spells to cultivate their alpine gardens. Anyway, I think it's perfect for her job, but... Dryads are kinda lazy. At least the ones that live around our place. Yeah, Lady Aura said, when they're not picking fruit, they sort of just hang out around their trees and veg? Sleep, stand around, do nothing. Kinda useless. Ludmilla looked down at Glaza. Dee Dee, don't compare me to those other dryads. She huffed indignantly, I'll be the best dryad druid ever. Glaza stood up again, brushing off her knees. Ludmilla frowned at her appearance, eyes going back and forth between Lord Mayor and the dryad. Is it possible for your foliage to grow in a more modest arrangement? Ludmilla asked. What does modest mean? The people around here cover their bodies, Ludmilla explained. Something like what Lord Mayor is wearing would be fine. The dryad regarded Lord Mayor with some confusion. But dryads are female, she said. I don't think I can grow huge leaves or even that much foliage, but I can try to imitate her. Glaza pointed to Lady Aura. Ludmilla lightly slapped the top of her hand. Ow! It's not her, Ludmilla told the dryad. You need to address others properly. Lady Aura and Lord Mayor are both very important people. You're lucky they're not as strict as Lady Shultier, or you might have ended up short a hand. A hand? Glaza looked down and started counting off her fingers. I don't even know how long that would take to grow back. That's why it's important to treat people with the proper respect, Ludmilla said. I can teach you everything you need to know over time, but we should cover what you will be doing first. Ludmilla went into Nonna's office, gathering supplies, a spare map of the island and a satchel to carry everything in. When she came back out into the hall again, everyone was standing near Glaza's tree. Since you two are doing your usual thing now, Lady Aura said, I'm gonna head out. Thank you for arriving on such short notice, my lady. Ludmilla lowered her head, as well as for everything else. Glaza flinched as Lady Aura hopped into her tree with a parting wave. The dryad's fingers tentatively ran over the bark of its slender trunk, face painted in an expression of disbelief. That isn't going to happen all the time, is it? She asked. Lord Mayor uses that tree as a teleport marker, Ludmilla answered. So unless he chooses another tree, he'll be going in and out of this one whenever he comes by. Since dryads have woodland stride, Lord Mayor said, it shouldn't be that weird, should it? The dryad cast a dissatisfied look at her tree. I can't use it, she said. You can't? Lord Mayor tilted his head. I get it, your tree is too small. That's right. Glaza pouted, I can't even hide inside my own tree. How stupid is that? What spell do you use to teleport around the Sorceress Kingdom, Lord Mayor? Ludmilla asked. That's the 6th tier druid spell Transport via Plants, Lord Mayor answered. Both Transport via Plants and Woodland Stride are teleportation type spells, but there are some big differences. Transport via Plants is basically the druid version of greater teleportation. I pick a plant, choose a destination, and the spell finds the closest plant of the same type to send me and the people I'm taking with me to. So say I want to go to Erantal, I cast the spell targeting the Divine Ash here, and it will pick the closest Divine Ash to Erantal to teleport me to. Since there's only one Divine Ash in Erantal, it will always teleport me to the same place. In a way, it seemed more powerful than the teleportation spells that other casters had access to. They either needed a degree of familiarity with the target area or set it as a teleport point. Transport via plants only required the same type of plant at both the departure and destination points. It was not as convenient as the other teleportation spells that could be cast from anywhere, but if one ensured the species of plant at each point was unique, it could be just as reliable as greater teleportation. One could also carry a potted tree with them as a sort of portable teleport point for others to use. Not that there were many 6th tier druids around. How does Woodland Stride differ? Transport via plants only requires a medium-sized plant, Lord Mayor said, but Woodland Stride requires a tree that is at least as wide as the caster. It's still a really good spell, though. Woodland Stride is a long-duration, short-range teleportation effect that lets you move from one tree to another tree up to 1 kilometer away in a single hop. The effect lasts 1 hour per 3 levels, and it lets you teleport an additional time every 3 levels. Going in and out of the same tree counts as 1 hop. The Dryad version is a skill that they use to hide inside their trees and get around their groves. In combat, I can cast a spell, hop into a tree when my enemy gets too close and pop up elsewhere to cast spells at them again. Or I can cast it on someone that wants to close distance on an enemy the same way. It works really well when Big Sis and I both use it to juggle enemies around. That does seem very useful, Ludmilla said. What tier of magic is Woodland Stride? 5th. So much for having it available to employ in regular tactical use. One needed a druid in the realm of heroes just to cast it. Or be a dryad. It did not mean that she would never encounter an opponent that used it, however. Is there any way to deal with an opponent that uses Woodland Stride? Without any advance preparation, Lord Mayor said, you can brute force it with Dimensional Lock. That would be trading an 8th tier spell for a 6th tier one, though. Then the druid can just bring the fight out of the radius of the Dimensional Lock effect. Most casters capable of Dimensional Lock can't sustain themselves as well as druids, either, so it's to our advantage. What else? Hallowed or unhallowed areas with dimensional anchor effects will stop it within their area. Then there's Lopsided Duel, which is a 3rd tier spell that teleports you to wherever your target teleports to. Again, most casters don't want a druid anywhere near them, so it's to the druid's benefit if they cast it. The only thing I might not like is if a warrior uses a skill that produces an effect similar to Lopsided Duel. There are worse ones that keep bringing you back to them, too. I'll work on that. Lord Mayor blinked and looked up at her. Well, Ludmilla said, if even you think it's annoying, it would probably be a nightmare for any opponents that I run into. Do you know anyone with a skill like that? I have no clue how to begin developing this sort of skill or martial art. Aura doesn't have one, but Albedo and Cocytus might. Albedo especially, she's a tank, so she should have some skills that help keep targets from escaping to attack others. Despite being a noble of the Sorceress Kingdom for over half a year, Ludmilla had never seen the Prime Minister. This was actually not abnormal. In fact, a minor noble being able to see so many royal courtiers was abnormal. Still, it felt a bit strange considering that she had recently been in the company of the Sorcerer King for 2 weeks. A rustle of leaves sounded beside them, and Ludmilla realized that she had gone off on a tangent with Lord Mayor. She and Lord Mayor often became absorbed in whatever topics that they were covering, which was why Lady Aura tended to leave them. Ludmilla pulled a map from the satchel before handing it to Glaza. These are all for you, Ludmilla said. The first thing you will need to do is learn how to read, write, and work with numbers, so I will be enrolling you at the village school. Classes begin after midday and run until late afternoon, so I can arrange for other activities in the morning and the evening. Ludmilla tapped her chin in thought, looking down at the map in her hands. You should be able to learn from the lizardman druids when they hole up in their homes for the evening. In the mornings, you can wander around familiarizing yourself with the island. Do dryads need to sleep? Dryads are nature spirits, Lord Mayor said. I'm not sure if you can call it sleep like regular living creatures sleep, but they're usually active during sunlight hours and can become dormant, which looks like they're sleeping. What if we provide her with magical lighting? Plants still have day and night cycles, Lord Mayor told her, so I don't think it will work the way that you probably think. Also, you're getting scary. Scary, my lord? Yeah. She was just born a few hours ago, right? You're already trying to figure out how you can maximize her utility. Maybe she had become too accustomed to working with the undead. A cold droplet of worry trickled through her at the possibility that, as an undead being, she might be losing her empathy for living things. It was not something that she had any desire to relinquish. Her gaze went over to Glaza, who only watched them nervously. The exchange with Lady Aura had probably been too much, as well. You're right, Ludmilla said. I'm sorry, Glaza, I got ahead of myself trying to figure out how you could best fit in. Ludmilla went over to the dining area, motioning for Lord Mayor and Glaza to join her. Not only had she been treating a newborn dryad poorly, but she was also being a poor host. Leluvian hadn't come in yet, so she produced the magically preserved meals from her infinite haversack. Lord Mayor's eyes lit up at the sight of the sandwiches and village stew, and Glaser examined her cup of water curiously. That's why it's important to treat people with the proper respect. She probably seemed like a self-serving hypocrite. Withdrawing several sheets of paper and a pen, Ludmilla took a deep breath as she settled herself. Though Glaser looked and communicated like an adult, she was essentially a child. The Dryad wasn't anything like the babies that had just been born to her household, but she was still a newborn under her care. "Let's start over again," she said. "Properly, this time. Beyond the tidbits of lore that contain unverified information, I know very little about Dryads. Warden's Vale will be your home from now on, Glaser, and you will be one of the most important people here. I would like to turn it into a place where you can flourish." As a final note, Countess Jesn's voice rolled out from the dais. "Her Excellency the Prime Minister would like to remind everyone that the weekly meeting of the Festival Committee will be held tomorrow morning at the usual time. Today's session of the House is now adjourned." A low murmur filled the air as the assembly started to rise from their seats. Ludmilla's hand shot out to lightly grip Baron Hamel by the collar before he dashed off. The Lord of Hamel was prone to running down the hallways of the royal villa, especially after long sessions of the House of Lords. During those sessions, he fidgeted and squirmed, constantly looked around, and seemed to do everything but pay attention to the proceedings. Ludmilla supposed that it was within the range of expected behavior for a boy in early adolescence, but she also suspected that Lord Hamel was the type to test his limits even under the watchful eye of his noble peers. As Ludmilla walked him out of the assembly hall and down the corridor, her friends made small talk with the other nobles, exchanging pleasantries and discussing various topics of interest appropriate for their setting. No one came to specifically speak with Ludmilla, though whether it was due to their usual wariness around her or the risk of having Lord Hamel foisted upon them, she was unsure. She wasn't even sure why she was doing what she was doing. Maybe it was because Clara had better things to do than wrangle her restless young neighbor. Or perhaps it was because Count Vulkenheim was the only adult nobleman in the assembly and he was far too soft to handle Baron Hamel. Ludmilla also suspected that the majority of the ladies in the assembly considered her the manliest member of the Sorceress Kingdom's aristocracy, so dealing with young boys with too much energy and being a role model for them was naturally her job. Leanne suggested that it was an opportunity to put the fear of the gods into Lord Hamel, that way, he would defer to Ludmilla for the rest of his life. They made their way out of the royal villa, stepping out into the late morning sun. Members of every household patiently awaited their lords and ladies, and Ludmilla steered Baron Hamel off to the side. There, the butler of House Hamel lowered his head at her approach. "Baroness Saradnik," the middle-aged man said. "Once again, I cannot express how grateful we are for your care." "Once again," Ludmilla replied with a tight smile, "Lord Hamel has escaped." House Hamel's butler blinked several times before twisting around to look for his loose lord. Fortunately for him, the boy was headed to his usual haunt in a garden nearby. "Excuse me, my lady," the butler lowered his head before chasing off after his charge. "My lord." Lord Hamel. Lord Hamel ignored him, preoccupied with calling out to two other nobles waiting in the garden, Baron Ardoin, who was close to Baron Hamel in age, and Albert Aveline, the new heir apparent of House Jesn. He was a relation brought in from Riestais, the scion of some distant cousins separated by generations. As the boys' racket rose from the garden, Clara, Leanne and Florine came up behind her. "No wonder that old crank looks even older now," Leanne said. Was that really all she could find? "That she found anyone at all should be counted as a blessing," Clara said. "House Jesn is as old as the duchy," Leanne waved a hand dismissively. "They're a cadet branch of one of House Bloomrush's vassals, too. If she's picking out of cousins and cousins of cousins, there should be at least 200 or 300 candidates. I hear little Lord Jesn's whole family was brought in. Lucky them." The three young nobles continued to play in the garden, their painstakingly arranged outfits falling to shambles. A collection of their maids and footmen looked unworriedly. Ludmilla hoped that they wouldn't look to her to settle them down and send them off. "How are they adjusting to life in the Sorceress Kingdom?" Ludmilla asked. "That question takes on a whole other meaning when it's you asking, Lady Zaradnik," Leanne frowned. "I haven't heard anything terrible." Florine swatted Leanne on the arm lightly, but Lady Jesn's selection should be the result of careful deliberation. His father was a clerk and his mother was a carpenter. There hasn't been the tiniest bit of noble education in their family line for generations, but most of her relations out there were probably like that. He should know how to read and write because of his father, but there is a lot to address when it comes to everything else. He is only 10, Clara said, so there is time enough. Speaking of which, Florine said, are you still instructing Baron Hamel, Lady Corlin? He seems to be getting to that age, Clara sighed, so I thought it would be better that he had a male mentor. Ah, if he had only acted with more naivete, Leanne intoned mournfully. He could have basked in the warmth of the radiant jewel for a bit longer. Ever since Clara had assumed responsibility for her younger neighbor, she went to instruct him on various aspects of rulership and aristocratic conduct on a semi-regular basis. The results of that education were clearly not on display in the nearby garden, but maybe it would establish itself in time. They walked over to where their carriages awaited them, climbing into a cabin mounted on one of House Wagner's newest vehicle frames. Their maids boarded the one behind them, the footmen assumed their positions, and soon they were on their way. Leanne kicked off her shoes and slouched in her seat, stretching in what must have been the most unladylike way possible. It's finally over. She yawned. I can't believe I was looking forward to all that. We all were, Florine said, except perhaps Ludmilla. Ludmilla made a face. With the harvest settled, all of Irantal's nobility had come to the city as was their winter custom. Events were discussed, opportunities explored, and social ties reinforced. With many of the houses now being led by women, it had become a strange mixture of the old way of things, when noble women worked in the background supporting their houses and territories, and what one might have expected out of the regular winter dealings of Riasti's lords. Now that everything had wound down, Ludmilla was exhausted. While undead could not physically tire, mental strain slowly, but surely built up. After 2 weeks of being Lady Zaradnik, she could no longer be annoyed at the memory of her father being so curt and communicating in grunts half of the time they were in the city. I thought it was very enjoyable and productive, Clara said. Sure, Leanne admitted, but it was still hell. The 2-week-long procession of aristocratic functions was concluded with a banquet held at Castle Corlin. In years previous, events would be held exclusively in the city, but the steadily developing transportation system made getting around the interior of the duchy fast and convenient. What was once a half-day journey from Irantal's southern gate to Corlin Harbour now only took half an hour. Ludmilla could only discern the most apparent of the purposes that Clara had in hosting the banquet in her new castle. It was a nice place in which to entertain guests and had more than enough room to host the whole of the duchy's nobility and their staff, but one would be sorely mistaken in thinking that Clara was simply showing off. Most of the summer's development of territorial infrastructure had been in Corlin County. Leanne just finished reorganizing the administration of her new territory and work on the Eastern Highway would be underway after the dwarves returned from their religious observances. Aside from maintenance efforts, the infrastructure in the west remained mostly as it had been when Irantal was a territory of Riasti's. One might be tempted to blame the slow acclimation to the Sorceress Kingdom's new systems for this, but it could only be called slow in comparison to the progress in Corlin County. Adoption of the new ways and the changes to provincial life that came with them was proceeding according to the schedule prescribed by the royal court, and that schedule would be considered unreasonably ambitious in the neighboring nations. Despite this, Clara saw fit to stoke the flames of ambition in the rest of the nobility. Though not a ranger, she was still a trailblazer. The development of her domain was a showcase of the future that she was now ready to display to the others. Unless they were attending their liege's court, nobles usually did not visit the fiefs of other nobles. To most, the reports of Corlin County were merely impressive words on a page. The banquet was an occasion of 3 days, where the nobles of the realm directly experienced the progress in store for their respective holdings. They attended presentations and held private meetings in Castle Corlin in the evenings. The days were spent traveling around the towns and territories to observe various applications of undead labor, technology and infrastructure. New institutions for basic education and vocational development opened their doors. Leanne and Florine had combined their efforts with Clara, and the entire affair became an exposition open to all and sundry. Representatives of guilds and merchant companies had been there to see what was in the offering, and even demi-humans were extended an invitation. By every measure, the event was a success, though whatever plots that Clara had set in motion Ludmilla had no idea about. Like the gardener she fancied herself to be, Her friend was displaying the fruits of their hard work and sowing new seeds with the expectation that they, too, would sprout and bear fruit of their own. The shadow of the Central District's southern gatehouse crossed over their carriage, and Ludmilla glanced out of the window. "We're headed out into the city?" "It's nearly lunch," Leanne said. "You're addicted to those things," Florian frowned. "Half of the time I think we set up that stand because you wanted to eat fried potatoes." "That might be true," Leanne grinned, "but it also makes money hand over fist. I'm still amazed no one brought it in from the Empire before I decided to. It's 100% domestic, too. Wagner's taters. Kat's assault. Corlin's beverages. Florian's fat ow. Why do you have to hit me like that?" Considering her friend's new equipment, Leanne shouldn't have taken any damage from an attack of that magnitude. Maybe it was just an ingrained reaction. "Why do you have to add my part like that?" Florian fumed. "At least you have a part," Ludmilla said. "Hey, now," Leanne said, "the stand is made with wood from your domain." Ludmilla's lumber. Once they had been unofficially informed of their coming transfer under Lady Shiltier's authority, a strange sort of energy came over Leanne. She wanted everyone to do as much together as possible, from casual outings to setting up fried potato stands to collaboration on major ventures. According to Florian, this was normal for Leanne. The young woman was very attached to her friends, and the idea that they would be members of a court of close friends only encouraged her all the more. Ludmilla was not averse to the idea, but she hoped that this relationship would not interfere with their duties. She had no worries about Clara, but the two younger nobles were far more casual in their conduct. Their carriage rolled into a plaza in the southeastern quarter, where many of Iranthal's heavy industries were located. Rather than place the stand in the city's main plaza, it was instead strategically set up in the midst of a demographic that its hearty fare would appeal to. Leanne nearly pressed her face into the glass. "Look at that line. We didn't even have to market the stall. All they needed was a good whiff." Along with the fried and salted potatoes, meat skewers and liquor were sold, as well as fruity sweets and pastries. It was an irresistible combination for the hard-working tenants of the quarter. Their cabin shifted slightly as several of their footmen dismounted and went to join the line. "That queue means we'll be stuck here for a while, as well," Ludmilla noted. "Nothing wrong with that," Leanne replied. "The harvest is over and all that craziness is behind us. It's time to relax." "You should be the person with the least time to relax," Ludmilla said. "Your workshops are churning out new contraptions every week." "Yeah, but that's research and development. You build things and collect data. Eventually, you build a better thing. Repeat until you get a marketable product. And it isn't as if I do everything personally." Truth be told, that was the case for all of them. They administered their territories, enacted various initiatives, then oversaw things. Nobles were nobles, they weren't professional artisans or specialized laborers like farmers. There was only paperwork and territorial maintenance while one waited for results to analyze and act upon. They still had various other things to do, however. Ludmilla had martial matters to attend to, including her work in the upper reaches, while her friends had their businesses to run. With the official transfer of their titles to Lady Shiltier would presumably come work for the Ministry of Transportation. Clara also had her colossal project slated to begin after things had settled down. "What are you doing?" Ludmilla turned her attention from the plaza at Clara's query. Across the cabin from them, Leanne was making strange gestures with a rose-colored handkerchief. "You know, the thing where you send signals. I turned 16 this summer, you know. Now that things look like they're going to be fine, I need to pop out some kids." 16 is too young to be having a family, Clara told her. "To the 6 prude gods, maybe," Leanne grimaced. "It wouldn't be considered strange if Florian and I had 1 or 2 babies by now. We don't have to wait until we're ancient." 20 is not ancient, Clara frowned. "There is a very good reason why we wait until we're 20. Beside Leanne, Florian tilted her head curiously. "There's a reason? I thought it was just an old tradition." Followers of the 4 generally conjured up such logic when confronted with the tenets of the 6. They carelessly labeled many practices and perceptions of Ludmilla's faith as old-fashioned, arbitrary, nonsensical, and even harmful. "Waiting until 20 ensures that you've had suitable time to figure out what you excel at," Ludmilla told the 2 noble women across from her. "Once your aptitudes are identified, You can look for an ideal partner to maximize your chances of having superior offspring. Nobles, of all people, should understand the importance of familial bloodlines.
Ah, there it is, Leanne said. The bloodline thing. I'm not sure what's worse, those old fogies who go on and on about their blue blood or people who think there's some tried and true trick to having superior offspring. Either way, treating women like us as breeding mares, don't you think that's messed up? The negative connotations that Leanne placed on being a breeding mare handily summarized the difference between them. For many, being treated as an object or livestock was something to be personally insulted over. It might have become a particularly stubborn point for Leanne and Florine. Having children with a partner that was chosen for them may have been a matter of duty when they were subject to their respective families' authority, but now they were in control. To followers of the Six, bloodlines were a part of who one was, an aspect of attraction for men and women both. Their beliefs were also in line with how the world worked, and the world did not care about nonsensical sensibilities. Humans did generally desire those they perceived as strong or successful, but it was an instinct rather than a decision that came after careful analysis and calculation. Relying on breeding instincts alone more often than not led to suboptimal outcomes. People could be deceived with courtships that were too brief, and one usually couldn't be too picky. Having indisputable proof that one's partner was who they claimed to be was an assurance that followers of the Six enjoyed. It isn't as if we'll just snatch anyone off of the street, Florine said. And how we raise our children is also just as important, isn't it? Pedigree does not guarantee anything. Ludmilla exchanged glances with Clara. She wondered if their views would change if they possessed knowledge of classes and levels and how bloodlines factored into personal development. Given that they would all officially be in the same camp, the answer would come soon enough. Not that we've had any luck here, Leanne added. The men here are no good. Well, there's Moman, but there isn't a single woman in the city that's been able to bag him. Guy's a legend, in more ways than one. The merchant traffic should be somewhat restored, should it not? Ludmilla asked. It is, but the ones who come here, we're getting the expendables, basically. Rantle is an easy place to trade since our industrial development is so lacking. We're still 99% farms and woodlots. The best and brightest merchants get sent by their companies to places with the stiffest competition. Leanne made more indecipherable gestures with the handkerchief, then opened the cabin window beside her. I don't think anyone would have noticed all that through the window, Florine said. You never know unless you try, Leanne replied. Not like it'll hurt me if nothing happens. With that, she dropped the silken handkerchief out of the window. Ludmilla watched it drift to the cobblestones. What happens now? What's supposed to happen, Leanne told her, is that someone who's on the lookout comes to pick it up. I just did a thing that signifies that I'm interested in making an acquaintance. Anyone that can read that should have some degree of sophistication, yeah? Moments later, a shadow appeared at the window. Leanne brightened, then frowned as a soul eater stuck its head into the cabin and returned the handkerchief. Clara visibly struggled to keep her laughter contained as the silken cloth settled on Leanne's lap. When's the wedding? Ludmilla asked.